The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, I don't know if you got a chance to check out the two-part interview Eric Francis did with Calgary Flames president of hockey operations Don Maloney in the last couple of days, but it has set the Calgary Flames fan base ablaze, particularly with just how some of his comments have been about how the season has gone so far and how they still want to have that push of it. Just at least the way the interview comes across from Don Maloney, they're really pushing away from any idea of rebuilding this team, pushing away from the notion of being in a situation where they could be in a top three for a top three draft pick in the coming draft. A lot of fans are really upset about it. I'd love to know your thoughts on how Calgary Flames fans have been feeling over this interview the last couple of days, which, by the way, you should check out if you haven't read already.
Yeah, I mean, my main takeaway from it, Julian, and it veered in a bunch of directions being a two-parter, but, was that they're at the top levels of the hockey operations department, very resistant to tearing down, to putting their fate in the hands of the draft lottery, in effect, by finishing towards the bottom of the standings, which, it's kind of ironic. I mean, Don Maloney's doing that interview at a time when the Calgary Flames are right at or near the bottom of the standings, depending on which day that was actually completed. The Flames did have a big win over Vancouver since then, but still, I mean, it's a team that's it's in the spot where in a different market, they might be talking about, hey, positioning themselves for McKenna, for one of the other draft picks in this 2026 draft. But clearly the mandate from Don Maloney, and, he's a representative of the owner, Murray Edwards, and the ownership group, is that they're not wanting to go down that way. And so I can understand why fans, are feeling a certain way about it. Look at the time we're in right now. Which teams are exceeding expectations, right? I'll give you three, and there might be more, but Anaheim, San Jose, Chicago, three teams that have had better than expected starts, probably. The Sharks have been very hot. Obviously, Anaheim, probably the best of those three teams so far, but still all three very much in the mix for a playoff spot after finishing near the bottom of the league the last few years apiece. They were fortunate in Chicago and in San Jose to get first overall picks, to win a draft lottery, to get Macklin Celebrini and Connor Bedard on their teams, but obviously have stockpiled many others. Leo Carlson, the Ducks got near the top of a draft, plus a number of other top 10 picks they've added along the way. We're in an environment where it becomes harder and harder to say you can't rebuild, because the most exciting teams in the league rebuilt and are they're still retooling. I'm not saying they're all the way there. We'll see if they can sustain this pace over a full season, all those types of things. But any way you cut it, the enthusiasm is spiking in places like Chicago, San Jose, and Anaheim, and after a few bleak years. And I can understand, look, the Flames have a bunch of things going on. They're going to open a new building in a couple years' time. I'm sure in a perfect world, you'd love to be lining up that you're taking off like a rocket ship just as you're opening that new arena. And there's so much excitement around, two different things happening. It might not be possible to line those up just because we are so close to the opening of that rink. But, it becomes harder and harder to make that point. And look, Don Maloney did point out as well, though, that there's vagaries of the draft lottery. You can finish near the bottom of the standings and not get a number one pick, or maybe get a number one or number two pick in a year when that player isn't as impactful as some of the ones that I've just mentioned that those other teams got. And there's some truth in there, but it still clearly is not something the fan base wants to hear. And I have to say, I don't know all. I don't know exactly how this is going to go, but you get the feeling that they're either going to face the reality now or it's going to be forced upon them at a later date. And I don't know how, whether that's 2 years down the road or 3 years, whatever it is. But they are a team that has been kind of in the middle, mushy middle, as we like to call it. Obviously, last year almost made the playoffs. Would have been a huge surprise if they did it. But you don't end up drafting at the top that way, and you don't end up really any further ahead. And now here they are down towards the bottom of the standings again. So, it kind of reminds me a little of the conversation that was raging a couple weeks ago in Vancouver. But there definitely seems among fans in those markets to be a desire to tear it down, even knowing that there'll be pain in the short term for what you hope is a nice long-term run with a new and exciting team. But in both cases, I don't think ownership or the hockey operations department is operating that way.
So when you hear the Don Maloney, not only, I know I mentioned what I mentioned with the draft picks, but it also mentioned that interview too. He seems very resistant on the idea of trading some of those veterans that are trying to bring in this winning culture. Like specifically with Nazem Kadri, they want more Nazem Kadris than less. When you hear that from this organization, considering the success or lack thereof they've had with those players, what does that make you think?
I mean, they could miss an opportunity with a player like Kadri. You know, when I look around at the trade board or my conversations with people in hockey, I mean, there's just not enough impactful centers out there for the number of teams looking to add one. I mean, we could start at Montreal, Vancouver, keep going down the list of teams that would love to augment, their center group, and specifically with someone who can, I think move the needle on a second line or even a third line. I mean, who fits that better than Nazem Kadri? He's still a competitive player, still a pretty productive player, and just spilling over with experience. And he's got the Stanley Cup bona fides, the whole thing. Now, the one thing with Kadri is he's still got multiple years left on his deal, so this isn't their only window to trade him between now and March 6th. I mean, that could still happen in the summer. It could still happen next year if there's a change in philosophy. But I do think at a certain point, you risk either the player getting injured just as he gets older. These types of things happen. You risk maybe his performance taking a dip because of age-related decline. There's a lot of unknowns, whereas what you have right now, I think, is someone you could take to market if you want to do that and start the process, right? Because it does two things. It weakens a team a little bit in the short term, which achieves the aim you hope of drafting higher. He brings in futures, whether that's picks or prospects or some combination of both. And you just keep taking a step in that direction. They have other players too. Blake Coleman's not on an expiring deal. He was pretty high on the trade board as we discussed earlier in the week, or last week. But, they have a lot of players that think they can move, but clearly they're not of the mind to do that. And we'll see if that changes. I mean, Don Maloney he couched a few answers in there. If you read sort of like between the lines, some of it was like, I'm just not ready to say this on November 20th or 24th or whatever. Like there was some level of leaving it open that if they're still in a similar spot in January or February or right up at March 6th, that maybe they'll take a different view and a different set of actions. But, it's one of those things. We always ask for honesty. We love when someone of this sort of stature in an organization speaks because, it is a message right to the fans. It feels like the message was not one that most of their most passionate fans wanted to hear.
And to add to this, I'm surprised that it's Don Maloney providing this message because of the last few years, even from when I was there, it's Craig Conroy who's trying to calm the waters down and try to at least provide some update on what's going on. Not saying that Don Maloney hasn't spoken at all or can't say anything, but I wonder how this would have gone. I know Eric Francis shared that same opinion too. I wonder how this would have gone if this was just an interview with Craig Conroy. And he's also mentioned in this interview just because of the fact that Eric asked, hey, what's going on with a potential contract extension? And there's no answer on that. So I'm also intrigued at how at the messenger in this particular situation. Like, why did they go away from having Craig Conroy talk about this versus Don Maloney, I guess?
Honestly, it's probably a PR question that I'd only be guessing at. Like, I don't know why they took that.
Sure.
Part of it might just be what you're saying, though. I mean, the GM is only under contract through this season. Maybe not the best person to talk about the long-term vision of the team until it's clear if he's still going to be running it. Look, it's an organization at a crossroads. Anyway, you sort of slice it here. It's a crossroads. Even having your GM go into the last year of his deal without a contract. I mean, it certainly happened. But let's remember two of the last times it happened. One was with Brad Treliving a few years ago, and he left Calgary. One was with Kyle Dubas in Toronto that same season. He left Toronto. Sometimes when it happens, there's just a risk of, basically a severing of the relationship. And, I think that this is a time where if you're the Flames, I think you want everyone on the same page. You want to be thinking big picture here. Like, there's nothing to be salvaged from this season. I'm not saying they can't still win some games. They might even string together a 4 or 5 game winning streak and, excite the fans. Like, I'm not saying you try to lose every game, but I just don't see, there's not a path for them, in my view, to like get back into the playoff race. And so really, I think it's, you got to sit down. You've got Rasmus Anderson on an expiring deal. I mean, it seems pretty clear he'll be traded. How are we going to do that? What do we prioritize? What do we need back? When do we do it? We got Nazem Kadri here. Everyone's calling about Blake Coleman. Do we want to trade Coleman now? I mean, he would have 2 years. Maybe there's more value for teams in buying 2 potential playoff runs of this guy versus waiting till next season. I mean, you would think that they would want to be having those conversations. And it just feels a little bit like putting your head in the sand to say, we're not going to rebuild. We're going to give this some more time. Like, it's like, what do you need more time to see? And I will acknowledge the Flames have had some real underperformances this year. And from players that I think have bright futures, like it could just be one of those seasons. I'm not saying everything has to go. Like that, I'm not of that view. I do think they have some nice young pieces. Like they got Dustin Wolf signed right before the season, and I could see him being a centerpiece for that team. I mean, I think that there's some pieces already in place, but there's not nearly enough of them, and some of the best players on the team are just in the wrong age bracket, right? I mean, they're just not going to be as effective as you're going to need them to be when you're ready to win. And so they have to figure out how they're going to get there. But I agree, like this message coming from the president, with the GM's future kind of hanging in the air, with the team floundering on the ice. I mean, look, it was a good set of interviews and a good set of pieces for Eric Francis, but I don't think that it's really advanced the causes of the Calgary Flames. It's just hard to know, how they're going to approach this. And frankly, I still think all roads kind of lead you to a rebuild, but it doesn't mean you have to, like, if you don't start it in 25, 26, you might just be starting it in 27, 28, and you're another couple years down the road and you didn't get, like what are they going to do with these next few seasons? I don't see them being a playoff team. And frankly, the reason they're going to be a playoff team, in my view, is they need the difference makers that the other teams around them are just getting, just these young guys, right? You're in the 3rd season of Connor Bedard, the 2nd season of Macklin Celebrini. Like all these players, Leo Carlsson in his 3rd year, like they're only going to get better and better and better. And those are the teams eventually you're going to have to go through. So, you can lie to yourself for so long, but I feel like the truth will come forward. And I keep trying to drag us to Vancouver because I see a lot of parallels there. And I think there's a similar sentiment in that marketplace with the Canucks. And, the Canucks too, I think they've won 2 of 17 games in regulation or something. I mean, look, the whole league is a bit of a mushy middle, as we talked about, so many overtime games and loser points and everything. But the Canucks, that's not it. Right. And what's the conversation there? The conversation there eventually is going to get to, do we start thinking about trading Quinn Hughes now? Do we, I know he can't sign his extension until July 1st. But if we're not going to be competitive, what's the plan here? And we don't have that answer yet. I mean, obviously, I would think if you're the Canucks, of course, you want to keep Quinn Hughes. And one of the ways you've been thinking and operating on that we can do that is by having, a great season, a bounce back this year. Well, I mean, we're a quarter of the way through, and it's not happening, and time's getting short on them to figure that out.
Oh, yeah. Losers of their last 3 games, 3 wins in their last 10. And, I mean, they only have, as of this recording, 1 more point than the Calgary Flames. I just want to add this one small point about the Flames before I jump right back into Vancouver. Whenever it comes time for the Calgary Flames to rebuild, they're going to have to go out and say, hey, we're actually rebuilding, because the enduring mark of the interviews Don Maloney has done is him stumbling on the word rebuild and retool, and people using the word rebuild. So just to put a cap on that, the Flames, when they eventually bottom out and they do the thing that everyone's been telling them to do, they have to go out there and tell everyone, hey, we're doing this. Vancouver, I imagine it'll be something similar with them. And I mean, in terms of different topics that people are talking about with that franchise, if I'm a fan right now, I'm not confident Quinn Hughes wants to stick around for any of this. And I'm not confident in the way that this team is built.
Right. And so you have to get down to facts with Quinn Hughes or his agent. Even though he can't sign that extension to July 1st, I think at some point in this season, and maybe it's not till you get to an Olympic break or, a period of the season where you're not playing every second night, which every team is right now. But I think you have to have a conversation. Is there any chance you're staying, basically? And if you're not, if you're really not of a mind to stay, how should we handle this? Because, clearly he would have value if the sooner they moved him at his current cap hit, he's a more valuable piece because his next contract is going to be vastly more money. And, we know about his desire to want to play with his brothers. I mean, if he gets all the way to UFA, he gets a chance to do that. But there is a world in the meantime, Vancouver potentially could trade him somewhere else. I mean, now we're getting deep into the hypothetical. I'm not trying to drag us into fantasy hockey here, but I think that what I'm kind of trying to highlight is that there's hard conversations that need to happen in both markets. And I don't mean with the fans. I mean with the people making those decisions. I think they should communicate that to the fans. I think they should have a plan, especially in passionate hockey markets. I think it's wise to actually have people in the position of power to say those things, whether it was Jim Rutherford or Don Maloney, Patrick Allvin, or Craig Conroy, whoever it is. I think it's fine to have a plan and just say it. I think smart hockey fans, honestly, or even some dumb ones, I think you can understand why the team gets to that point, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're having this conversation because there have not been very many series wins by the Canucks or Flames in the last number of years. I know the Canucks had a bit of a run in the bubble. The Flames had a pretty memorable win with the Johnny Gaudreau goal in the first round a few years ago. But truly, the reason we're having this conversation is because those organizations have largely been treading water, right? And both teams have, in effect, resisted the kind of rebuild. And I get it. Everyone that doesn't want to rebuild, every person in management could say, yeah, but Buffalo. Or as Don Maloney did, he didn't want to name them, but who he was talking about. And yes, Buffalo is this crazy outlier that somehow over effectively they've done 2 full rebuilds, arguably in this 14 years. And they've had innumerable good players come through the organization as a part of those rebuilds and then go and win Stanley Cups elsewhere. But somehow they haven't made it work in Buffalo. That's true. I will grant you that. There's one team where it hasn't worked. But I think we've seen enough other places where it is working, and it's exciting. What is more exciting than great young players and a team lifting off? And I think that's really been one of the larger narratives of this season to me, Julian, is some of these teams that are arriving, right? And we don't know to what degree if they're ready for yet, but it's driven by youth, and it feels like every game weirdly is like Game 7, right? No one's bored because you're curious. Can the Sharks keep winning? Can the Blackhawks keep doing what they're doing? Anaheim, is this for real? All of a sudden, California. I'm old enough to remember when it used to be the road trip no one wanted. Then it became the road trip where you basically had 5 of 6 points before the plane landed. Now it's back to being a crappy road trip again because the Kings, Ducks, and Sharks are all pretty tough opponents as teams are finding out. So, to me, it's a little disingenuous to just say, yeah, but Buffalo, because I don't even have the answer for Buffalo. I think we've said this on the pod how many times? We get to the Sabres and I'm almost I don't know what to say because I don't know what's happening. I can't pretend to have an answer for this. But it really is only one team, right? There are lots of other teams that got crappy. The Sharks and Blackhawks the last few years got crappy, right? Look at, and the Ducks too. Look at who was the big sellers at the last few trade deadlines. Those organizations, right? They traded a lot of players away, good players, right? The Sharks traded, Thomas Hertl. They traded Erik Karlsson. They traded a bunch of players, and then also obviously more role players. Michael Granlund last year. Point being is they're now reaping the fruits of that, and I just think if Calgary went into that mode, or Vancouver went into that mode this year, and there's still time. I'll say this: you can do an interview in November and still act differently in January. But if they go into that mode, I don't think there'll be that many fans upset. Yeah, there's going to be some long nights. You're going to lose some games 7-1. Maybe, I'm sure attendance suffers in a little bit in both cases. But I think attendance might suffer anyway if you're caught in the middle. So I acknowledge it's not necessarily an easy business decision, but I think it's a pretty easy hockey decision when you're faced with the realities both those teams are.
Also, I appreciate the fact that you've mentioned Anaheim and San Jose and Chicago. But if you're a GM in Vancouver, or if you're the GM in Calgary, you have teams east of you in this country who have rebuilt in the last few years and are starting to see success. It bottomed out for Montreal, and now they're looked at as an exciting team. The Ottawa Senators took a little longer, but they have a core that's building towards contention. You have 2 examples hours from you out east that were forced to rebuild, but they rebuilt. And they're now on their way to they're trying their best to be competitive teams, and they have players that are worth watching and being excited about. Like, you don't even have to look at the teams out west. You can look at the teams out west for the quality of players that they have, but there are teams in similar markets to you right now that have done the rebuild thing. And you can look at them and be like, hey, you know what? Like, if it worked out in Montreal where people get mad at you in two languages, why can't it work here? You know, like that's what I'm confused about more than anything.
And do you know what else, Julian? Neither of those teams, and I say this with respect to all their top players, but neither of those teams got like a world beater, like the best player in the league kind of guy. Like they got lots of high-end talent, but none of them like won the draft and won what I think potentially say Celebrini could be. Like I think there is a world possible where Celebrini is the best player in the NHL in a few years' time. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, or Bedard, honestly, it could be. But the point is like, or maybe even Matthew Schaefer. I mean, there's 3 consecutive number ones. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. But the point is that I don't think any of those teams have a player likely to be number one in the world. Now, I know there's Demidov stands out there that are probably like, CJ, what are you doing? But I think realistically, you know, and he's an awesome talent, and I'm certainly not at all saying anything negative about him. I'm not sure he's at that level. You know, Lane Hutson's coming off winning a Rookie of the Year. You know, very dynamic defenseman. Like, but I'm not sure he's quite there. But still, just like I guess the point is they probably got fortunate with some of their draft picks, as any team does usually when you turn a corner. But it wasn't like a series of 5 first overalls and, you know, they got McDavid and Draisaitl and you know, whatever happened in Edmonton. Like that worked for Edmonton, obviously, for a long time now. They've been competitive after getting those players. But I guess there's more than one way to do it. And, you know, Don Maloney cited in one of those interviews, he cited the Dallas Stars, right? And, you know, I think every team would like it to be the Dallas Stars because they had sort of one era and they kind of seamlessly went to the next era because they drafted like difference-making players at each position in the same draft. Like, I as much as, you want to get, you know, Heiskanen, Jason Robertson, Ottinger, all in one go, they're an outlier the other way. Like, I know the Stars are like, every year we do those front office rankings, Julian, everyone raves about the Stars. They rave about their continuity. They rave about their whole program, scouting to player development, everything. Like, I'm not saying it's a fluke that they did that, but I still think it would be hard to replicate by anybody. And so, you know, you almost have to remove the extreme examples because yes, they're possible, but the mean is more likely, right? And I think if you're looking at the mean results of these teams, you're getting you're right, the Senators and Canadiens. And look, the Canadiens have had some downs. Obviously, they're dealing with a lot of injuries right now. They're not a guarantee by any means to make the playoffs for a second straight year. You know, Ottawa's looked pretty good, especially here of late. But I guess there's a world they're not guaranteed either. Like, I'm not saying these teams are ready to win the Stanley Cup, but clearly they're on an upward trajectory and driven by young talent. And it's been exciting in both fan bases, and both markets were alive for playoff games last spring. I mean, you know, I think you're right. There's not just the 3 I mentioned. There's probably 6 or 7 recent examples that at least give you a kind of a path to what it could look like. And Montreal's case, it didn't even take that long. I mean, that's the great thing. But they had tremendous asset management. What did Montreal do? One of their first things, they got a first-round pick to shake Sean Monahan. Then they got another one when they rebuilt Sean Monahan and traded him away. Like, they made – those are smart asset moves, and they made many of them. That's just one that popped into my mind. You know, you have to get creative. You have to really maximize what you can. And then, you know, if you amass enough picks, even an average scouting staff is going to get you players.
Oh, yeah. I think you have that right. Anyway, we could talk about rebuilding teams for an entire episode series, a 2-parter of our own if we wanted to. But yeah, I'm glad we were able to touch on Calgary and Vancouver. Since we mentioned the Montreal Canadiens, they signed Alexandre Texier over the weekend. Any insight on how they ended up being the team to get him?
Yeah, I mean, kind of an unusual period of time here, right? You got David Kampf terminating his contract. Texier does the same in St. Louis. Even Alexander Georgiev just did the same on this day in Buffalo. You know, with Texier, he was in no man's land with the Blues. He wasn't playing very much. Inconsistency basically took him out of the lineup there, and he was willing to make a bet on himself. He's going to make a little less money by terminating the deal he had, a little over $2 million. Signs for prorated $1 million in Montreal, so got his pay cut in half effectively from this point forward anyway in the season. But, you know, he's a very strong skating forward who I think can play sort of middle six, in your forward group when he's at his best. I think consistency will be a question, and the Canadiens need bodies, right? At the end of the day, the Montreal Canadiens, with the number of injuries they've been shouldering here of late, have been playing players you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in the NHL, and then they haven't been winning very many games. So, I think that's a nice fit for him, and it's a chance to go from a team in St. Louis that's kind of at the bottom of the standings to one in Montreal that hopes to be a little better than that. Obviously, he's a native French speaker even, which is a nice little bonus, but I think more than anything, similar to David Kampf. I mean, Kampf went for the opportunity in Vancouver because both Kampf and Texier, what they have in common is they're betting on themselves. They are literally leaving money on the table by their own decisions this season to get on somewhere else. And I'm trying to think, like, why is this happening, Julian? Like, why all of a sudden in a span of 8-9 days do we get 3 players terminating their deals? And there's rumors out there of another one too. I don't know who it is, so I don't even know who it's going to be. But I just had caught wind of that in a side conversation I had about something else. But I think it's because you're not seeing any trades, right? Like, and obviously any of these players could have been had on waivers because they went through waivers prior to having their deals terminated, but they were making too much money for teams. But they effectively, by making themselves free agents during the season, they've created a market. And part of that market is driven by the fact that teams can't just go out and make trades. Like the market is absolutely frozen. And so, I think it's compelling. There's very little risk, I'll say, for both Montreal with Texier, with Vancouver with Kampf. I mean, those new deals could be buried entirely in the American Hockey League with no cap penalty if things don't work out. But obviously, when you make that signing, you're hoping you're getting a motivated player that has something to prove, and at a time when you have some glaring roster needs. So that's kind of the open and shut case of Texier. But I think almost the trend of multiple guys doing this is what has my attention more than any of the individuals.
When we were recording this episode on Monday night, we initially were going to record our Leafs Corner segment, and then CJ was like, do we have to? And then his feed cut out like seconds later. I thought you purposely wanted out of recording Leafs Corner.
I could see why you think that, but no. I thought, do we have to? Mostly just because, like, at what point, what more is there to say? Like, it feels, it's hard to have original thoughts on this particular file or on this particular team or situation. But no, that wasn't a case of me like going, oh, sorry, the reception's not working over here, buddy. Literally, it was just the universe. The universe just disconnected us right at that moment.
Oh, man. Well, I'm glad you're back. But I get it. Not that much more to say, but we're talking about a team that, as of this recording, is dead last in the Eastern Conference and in the bottom 5 in the league on points percentage. Like, I know in previous episodes we've talked about how they can't trade themselves out of this, but this is not a good hockey team. And to see them get stomped the way that they did against the Canadiens, I know they tried to come back, but this doesn't bode well for this team.
That's putting it lightly or mildly. I mean, I want to choose my words carefully, but I'll say this. I think that I've spent the last couple days talking to other people that aren't directly associated with the team, specifically just people that are keeping an eye on things, that are in the industry, that have viewpoints that are removed from the emotion of what's going on there. And we're getting to the point where, if I'm going to sum up the sentiment, is that, it's too late for them. Like that essentially whatever you might have hoped for this season has passed them by. I don't believe internally that's the sentiment. I think that the reason they're forging forward and not making any, I do believe they still think they got a chance because the standings are bunched up. But I'll say this, there's two things about the standings being bunched up. It's like a funhouse mirrors when the standings are bunched up, because the reason they're bunched up is because every single night the teams ahead of you are getting 1 point, if not 2. And so how are you going to leapfrog those teams? You're going to, like, the Leafs where they are right now, and it's not impossible, but they need to go on like multiple sort of 5-6 game winning streaks just to kind of leap forward, right? Like to actually make meaningful progress in the standings. The way they've played this season, that's not on the table for them, right? It doesn't mean every game's been awful, but like they've played well enough to win the odd game, or they've snuck one out in overtime or what have you. But they have not been a team that's consistently outplayed their opposition. And when you look at the opposition they've had, strength of schedule was one of the things that's supposed to be in Toronto's favor to start this year. They played a lot of home games, and they played a lot of teams that didn't have playoff success a year ago. And so you stack that up with the injuries, you stack that up with just something seems off, and then you stack that up with I don't think there's an easy solution in terms of what you do right here, right now to change this, to turn this yacht around. I just think there's too much there. I could see them getting better, but getting good enough to actually make a run to the playoffs now, like it's becoming a harder thing to imagine, even with the top end talent this team has. I mean, the thing that's hard to get past, William Nylander is a top 5 scorer in the league as we're recording this. John Tavares is one of the best 5-on-5 scorers in the league. Even Auston Matthews, who was not having a stellar season, but prior to his injury, like his points per game were somewhere in a high end level. My point is it's not as though everybody has been ice cold and they look this bad. Like something's off. They don't have answers. Normally you talk about firing a coach in this spot. It's a very different, I think, calculus when your coach is in his second season and his only previous season included a division title and a series win. He's still got 2 more years on his deal. So I get that, when everyone's looking for a quick answer for any team, it's trade guys or fire this guy or whatever. But I don't think reality is actually that kind to the Leafs in that case. I'm not saying that won't happen. I mean, look, they've lost 7 of 8. If they lose 10 of 11, like what are we going to be saying on the pod in a few days' time? And they got a little break in their schedule here, but then they play I think Wednesday, Friday, Saturday on the road. It's not going to, or Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday. Anyway, the point is it's not going to be easy to pull out of this. I don't really see the path. And, so what we're waiting for is, if that's the case, how does the organization react? But I just don't think internally the organization's there yet.
So Berube is one thing. Brad Treliving, I know we've discussed both of their seats with regards to this team before, but I think it's still worth asking about both Berube and Treliving and their job statuses, considering how far this team seems to be plunging downward.
Well, I'll give you the opposite. Like, what is firing a GM at this point in any team? What does it accomplish? I guess it gives the fans or it gives the impression to teams like, hey, we're doing something. We recognize this isn't acceptable. But the truth is when you're doing an in-season hiring event, either a coach or a GM or anybody, assistant coach, like you have a limited pool of candidates, right? To me, if you want to make those kind of big changes, it's smarter to do it when there's more people available to be hired. And that tends to be in April or May. So it's not to say that there won't be a firing in Toronto, but other than, sometimes I think the fan base is going to get increasingly loud and noisy here. I'm not saying it's been quiet so far, but I think the displeasure is going to only grow. And so I think that maybe sometimes making a move like that, it gives people like a small sugar burst of like, yeah, well, at least they're trying, but I'm not sure in reality if it's the right way to go. So look, anything's possible. When you because the Leafs haven't just underperformed, right? They've underperformed from a spot where they were talking about being a Stanley Cup contender. Like, this isn't a team that's like, oh, they're 10 points off last year's pace. Like, they're 30 points off last year's pace or something like that. And they've been in the playoffs for 9 straight years, which no other team can say right now in the NHL. And they've come to expect playoff dates. And well, I realize that the punchline will be, yeah, but they've come to expect, only 1 or 2 rounds of playoff dates. They've still been in the playoffs all those seasons, right? They've had a chance. They've been one of the last 16 teams or one of the last 8 teams or even one of the last 5 teams standing in multiple seasons recently. Like they've been in the mix in theory if they could have got it together or won one of those game 7s or whatever to win a cup. Like that internally, they've always felt that way. Well, this is now looking like a team that might not just miss the playoffs, but might miss it by a lot. Unless it gets hot, like right away. Like the numbers are the numbers, Julian. I mean, we are recording the week of U.S. Thanksgiving, the mythical date when it's impossible to turn a season around from. And I suppose if you want to have one person around that's done it, Craig Berube is the guy, right? He was there when St. Louis actually did the impossible in 2018-19. But we were talking about outliers earlier in the show. That result is also an outlier. That was almost like a mythical cup. I mean, full credit to them. They won a Stanley Cup. But I'm not sure anyone will repeat what those Blues did in my lifetime. And so, what can we call this must? Like, I don't even know how to approach this conversation, because obviously the Leafs are also down 7 regulars too. Like, and I do expect a couple guys back Wednesday, but part of this is also just like, can this version of this team, while they're struggling, be counted on to somehow reel off 3 wins this week? I mean, if they did that, maybe there's a different feel. I know that sounds crazy. Like, we're now just talking about 3 random games in November, but they've been losing so many random games in November. At some point, if they don't win some, there's going to be some really stark decisions and feelings around the team.
Columbus on Wednesday, Washington on Friday, Pittsburgh on Saturday, and then Florida next Tuesday for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then you have Carolina, Montreal, Tampa. I'm not going to go through the rest of their schedule, but there's some, you find a way to win some games off of these teams I just mentioned. I do see your point. The mood starts to change a little bit. The one thing I'm looking at now, and I guess it's kind of helpful that these teams in the Eastern Conference have been so close. It's just, if this team's not good enough and they're on pace to miss the playoffs by whatever points, if you're a Leafs fan, you are hoping they lose so much, because you're not going to have that first round pick for the upcoming draft.
Not unless it's top 5.
Exactly, a top 5 protect pick. But like, you do not want to be in a situation where you see your team not have a first round. I think with how this draft is shaking up to be, it would be pretty tough to see this Leafs team, at least for the fans anyway, not take advantage of the prospects available after their team misses the playoffs.
You know who owns the first round pick, right?
Right, Boston. Yeah, it's even worse.
So it's not just that you're not picking. There's a world where the Boston Bruins are selecting 6th overall with the Leafs pick. I mean, it could happen.
Like, the video that would come out from Steve Dangle if that were to happen. Like,
but honestly, I don't even want to go down. It's not because it's just like, there's not much we can, like, we've made the point there at the draft pick. What is interesting to me, though, is what would the team do if this doesn't turn? And how big a sellers would they turn into? The reason the Leafs first round pick lives in Boston is because Boston was in the same spot a year ago. Boston had a team that was perennially in the playoffs, that was used to success, that kind of got injured. Everything that could go wrong went wrong early in the year. They never got it going. They were out of the mix, and they made the decision to not just sell, right? Like, they sold a little deeper than the obvious. Like, even though Brad Marchand was an emotional decision, he was a pending UFA. They couldn't come to a contract with him that they were happy with. You trade that player. But they also traded Brandon Carlo with a couple years left on his deal, right? And, he's still got 1 year beyond this season. So, when they didn't have to trade him. They traded Charlie Coyle. But the point being, though, Julian, is how deep would the Leafs, would they copy what the Bruins just did? Would they do like a little quick pivot? Like, I don't think there's any world we're talking about the top guys. Let's not even go there. That's not on the table. But, basically from the middle meat of the roster, there's some good NHL players there if the Leafs wanted to sell them individually. And would they lean into being sellers? I would be fascinated. It's been a long time since anyone sold in Toronto. I think the last time it happened, was Lou Lamoriello must have been the GM. It was before Kyle Dubas. So anyway,
are you saying the Leafs might have to consider retooling?
I think it'd be a retool. I'd call that a retool because you still got Matthews, Nylander, Tavares signed. See what they would decide with Riley, but he signed longer term. Like you still got some pretty core pieces, and I think some players that have good hockey left in them. You have the hard part, honestly. The hard part is getting someone. The Leafs would like Auston Matthews to be healthy, but getting a player like Auston Matthews is the difficult part. Not to say any of roster building is easy, because there's just a lot of things that go on there. But anyway. I don't have deep thoughts on it, but I'll be fascinated to see do they actually turn to sellers if they get that chance.
Last thing before I get you to go to ask CJ, do we have any clarity on the health of Auston Matthews at this point? It's becoming a little bit weird that we don't.
Yeah, but I would say this. It's weird because they're just not telling you. Like, my understanding is there's no setback here. Like, this isn't a case. It's more that I almost feel like the expectations haven't been managed well, which is not the first time we've seen this, right? It's become a thing. The Leafs are just a team. They don't tell you what the injury is. They don't give you a realistic, time frame for recovery. Look at what the Canadiens press releases just were, right? 4 to 6 weeks, I believe it was on Gooley. Whatever. I mean, this specific surgery, it removes, seriously, it just removes speculation and it removes all these questions. I think the Matthews injury always was a 2 to 3 week injury when it's happened on November 11th. We're in week 2 now, moving towards week 3. I don't expect him to play Wednesday against Columbus, but still don't think it's going to be much after that. I mean, I still think he's going to fall within the reasonable time frame for the injury he's dealing with. They just never announced what it was and haven't really managed the communication of that. I don't know why. I don't want to even, because I'm veering too close to reporter complaining about reporter's job things. And I don't want to do that. But I think that it's important context in the way you ask the question, because I think it's natural for fans or anyone who's maybe not as dialed into the situation to wonder, what's going on here? There's this big mystery. And I actually don't think it's a big mystery. He's dealing with a muscle injury. It requires rest. It requires getting comfortable. It's not just obviously there's treatment involved, but it's not like when a player has a specific surgery that happens all the time and it's a bone healing or what have you, usually you just know. I think with Matthews, some of it will be feel, right? Some of it's how and so whether he plays Wednesday or Friday or Saturday, a little bit will just depend on how he reacts to what he's doing on the ice. I think he's very close to his return. I don't imagine it'll be Wednesday, but as I look back on it, I just think everybody would have been better to know from the start, hey, it might be 3 weeks, because that would have cut out the last 10 days of questions about it. Do you know what I mean? And then the questions only start when you get close to 3 weeks and you're like, okay, he's getting close, right? Anyway.
Nope. You know what?
That's what I know. What I know is I think he's going to be back soon. I don't think anything crazy is happening behind the scenes. I don't think there's any Germany stuff. It's nothing like what happened last year. Again, sometimes the more you don't say can create a vacuum of information that I think doesn't help anybody in this case, especially.
No. By the way, all I wanted to say was, and maybe I am biased as a fellow reporter, I don't think your discourse about how the Leafs don't really discuss much injury stuff, I don't take it as a reporter complaining about reporter job. I think you were in the clear. But also, again, I'm biased.
Do you want to know a secret? I know a secret? I might regret saying this out loud. It's actually better for reporters when they don't manage it that way, because there is all this intrigue around it that doesn't really need to be there. So a couple of years ago when it got to the playoffs in Boston and William Nylander all of a sudden wasn't available after playing 82 regular season games and no one would say anything. Literally at the time, Sheldon Keefe was the head coach. So this isn't just one coach. This isn't just on Berube or whatever. It's an organizational thing, right? But they wouldn't say anything. And it gave 6 days of just bonanza stories because any little piece of information you could find out mattered. Whereas do you know how boring it would be if they just got to the Boston and just said, hey, look, Williams dealing with some migraine headaches. He's going to miss a couple games here and he's got to see his sensitivity to if you just say that, it removes the next 4 days of story. But I mean, I think they know that they're just making the decision not to share. So, but the secret, the dirty little secret is I don't think it hurts the reporters. I think in some ways, I just think it hurts the fans because it creates a hysteria that doesn't need to exist. I mean, in some cases, injuries, teams literally don't know. There are cases like that, especially in the playoffs, because players play through a crazy amount of pain and they do nutso things to play in the playoffs. So almost the traditional timelines go out the window in the playoffs. But I also think teams also generally know certain injuries just have certain recovery points. It just is what it is.
Man, counterpoint to your initial point here, I think even if you tell us the timeline, and maybe it's specific to a guy like William Nylander, I don't think you're removing that much intrigue. I'm not. If I'm a reporter, I get it. There is the whole thing.
It takes away the day to day, though, is what I mean.
It
if
absolutely
you start
does.
off by being he's gonna miss the next 2 games. No one's asking for the next 4 days about it because they know he's not gonna play those games.
Fair, but also depending on how that team plays. You could still form stories being oh, they're clearly missing this guy. Or if this team's playing well without him, it's well, wow, they're doing this without this guy. Yeah, I get it. And maybe it's for different mediums too.
But you can form much more sensational stories when they don't say anything.
Yes.
Because you're like, I saw him walking down the street in a cardigan. What does it mean? Like, my point is you can make it anyway.
No, you're right. You're right. It's funny enough you mentioned that because a couple of days ago, I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but could you imagine, say, William Nylander got hurt and then was spotted at a dinner with insert pop star here? Like,
Tate McRae. I actually saw that.
Right, with Jack Hughes. But, of course, we know Jack Hughes will be out for some time because of his injury. But, like, imagine if you had that.
If you get injured, you're allowed to have a life. Like, I saw this with Cam Scatterbo, the Giants running back, too. Like,
yes.
But anyway, now we're veering in all kinds of directions.
That's okay. We could get us to Ask CJ. By the way, I'm with you. Like, you're allowed to have a life and you're allowed to do whatever. I'm not mad at Jack Hughes. My whole point is just, like, you know, whatever story. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We can get to Ask CJ. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions over Discord, the app formerly known as Twitter as well. Let's start with this question from Landon. What teams called for Carolina Hurricanes forward Andrei Svechnikov? And if they did, what were the offers? There were some reports circulating around him and the possibility that he might want out of Carolina.
I wish I knew. I mean, I can't pretend I know what the offers were. I mean, look at what we can tell you about Carolina that's a fact is that organization is unafraid to think big, unafraid to try to make home run type of trades. They made one last year. That Mikko Rantanen deal, if you remember, Julian, in January, more or less came out of the clear blue sky. Like there was not a lot of stories about that ahead of time. But we also know when Vancouver was dangling JT Miller and Elias Pettersson that the Hurricanes were in on those conversations. I think when Kirill Kaprizov wasn't getting his deal done in Minnesota, they were curious what could be happening there. So they're a team that wants to make a big trade and has wanted to for a while and has made one truly big trade in the last calendar year. And so who are they going to trade if they do it? Well, I think a player like Andrei Svechnikov, who's kind of regressed a little bit, although he's been hot. He didn't score for a long time, but he's picked it up here in the last few weeks. I think his name being part of some of those conversations makes some sense. So I don't have a great answer for you right now to that question, but I think the truth is his name being out there is because this is what the Hurricanes do. I applaud them for it, frankly. I think they are... they're trying to manufacture something. They did a nice job. They got Nikolai Ehlers this year as a UFA, but generally speaking, they're facing a little bit of an uphill battle. Like they tried to trade for Mitch Marner last year. Like think of all the things they've tried to do, right? They're sitting back. They're not sitting there going like, hey, we have a team every year that's in the Final Four and that's good enough. Like they're trying to break through, and so if you can upgrade at a top six position, I think you do it. But that might mean removing a player from your top six. And so that's where I think it's at with Svechnikov. I don't by any means have any reason to believe he doesn't want to play there or anything like that. I don't think it's that. I think it's more that they're going to be aggressive, and I don't think that's going to change between now and March 6th.
A Wild John wants to know, is Morgan Geekie the most underrated player this season? He is tied for the league lead in goals, and I feel like no one talks about him as an elite player. Wow. Elite player, A Wild John says. 17
goals, Julian. 17 goals. I'll tell you, Morgan Geekie wasn't tendered a qualifying offer by the Seattle Kraken a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. Like, he has made massive strides. I mean, look, that's a player I believe started in Carolina, right? I think he went to Seattle as part of the expansion draft from the Hurricanes. Has always had a buzz around him. Like, he's a talented guy, but he's really taken some massive steps, right? And to the point where he got a nice contract last summer done with the Bruins, and he's then taken another leap forward. I mean, good for him. No, there's no evidence of resting on his laurels or, getting that big deal locked in and just putting it on cruise control. I mean, I don't know if he's the most underrated, but I bet you could win. You could go to your favorite bar down the street and you might win a bet by asking who has the most goals in the NHL right now. I don't know how many people would be saying Morgan Geekie. So yeah, I will sort of buy what you're selling in the sense that he's one of the more underrated players in the league. He's having a fantastic season. He's been a great story in Boston, and it's 2 years running now. Like, he had a great year last year. got rewarded with the contract, and he looks like he's going to raise the ceiling again. And if that's the case, I mean, I believe it was a 6-year deal the Bruins gave him. I mean, that's going to be an absolute grand slam for them if he keeps getting better.
You mentioned Carolina and his time in Seattle, and I know Mike Bartner on Twitter did a video about this. Ron Francis essentially drafted Morgan Geekie twice and doesn't have him. Like, he got him with Carolina, and he got him in the expansion draft with Seattle. Ron Francis essentially drafted Morgan Geekie twice.
And Boston got him for free, other than the contract they paid him. But like they didn't have to. They got an impact player. Like, think about it. They got an impact player there that they didn't have to trade for. They didn't give up draft picks for. They didn't even use a draft pick on. They made a smart signing, and they made a smarter signing. Honestly, the last summer signing might be the smartest of them all, because they recognized he's something. They gave him a 6x6-ish deal, 6.5, whatever that money was there. And now they might have him on an absolute bargain in a rising cap environment.
We Used to Be Mighty wants to know if there's anything going around with Anaheim Ducks defenseman Pavel Mintyukov. There were some reports that he might want out when he was being healthy scratch. He actually did play, I believe, against the Ottawa Senators a couple days ago. But just curious, from We Used to Be Mighty, if there's anything out about him.
Yeah, I mean, where it stands right now is he's not happy. He sat 3 games for the Ducks. And, we're talking about a guy, top 10 pick a couple years ago, jumped right from junior hockey in Canada right to the NHL. This is the flip side of the rebuild, Julian. They have a lot of good young D in Anaheim. And so hard decisions have to be made. I don't think by any means does the organization feel they need to trade him right now. And I believe they'll be patient. But something like those set of scratches and Mintyukov's reaction to them, is his name's out there. Like, teams are, kicking tires to see if something could work. And he's on the final year of his entry-level contract. So, while he doesn't have rights to go sign with any team now when this season's up, I suppose there could be an offer sheet. We'll see. But, he does have the ability maybe to go home. Like I think this is what I'll say is there's a relationship to be monitored here. And maybe it's a bump in the road and he plays the rest of the games and the Ducks continue on with their season and we almost forget this happened. Or if this becomes a trend, I do think we'll move towards, a point where there could be a trade. But, it's still early enough days that the team has no reason to have to trade him. They have to sit someone out, and they chose him on a couple nights, and they won the first 2 of those games. So it happened, and coaches don't usually change a winning lineup. But I'd say let's keep monitoring that one, and it could be a pretty intriguing name if they do decide to move him, because he's a good young defenseman.
Tyler wants to know your hottest take on the hot dog toppings that the Toronto Maple Leafs posted on X over the weekend when they were in Montreal. The mustard and relish, that assortment on the hot dogs they had. Yeah, the half and half. Tyler says it's an unhinged way to put condiments on a hot dog.
Against my better judgment, I tweeted at the admin on that one. I hope I didn't make the person's life any worse, because it is someone I know personally who runs that account for the Leafs. But I called it unhinged. It was diabolical. It was like, I can't believe you would ever do a full half of any topping and a full half of the other. I mean, my only hot take is whatever your toppings are, spread them more or less evenly across the dog. I mean, I think that's common sense, right? You're not doing half mustard, half relish. Mm-mm. Now, I will say, I'm not a relish on a dog guy. I like relish. I would eat it. If you served me one, if you gave me a hot dog at your house and there's relish on it, I would eat it. But if I'm choosing the toppings, I wouldn't choose to put relish on there. That's kind of where I land. I'd love a diced onion on a hot dog, though. If you have a diced onion, the odd time if I'm down at the ballpark, back when I got to do that, and you're in downtown Toronto and they got the street meat going, I have to say, usually they have the diced onions with a little mustard, a little ketchup. Pretty nice combo there.
I don't want ketchup on my hot dog. I'm sorry. I would rather relish. I would rather anything else. Maybe not anything else. Ketchup is a no-no for me. I'm not 5 years old.
I'm not taking the bait.
All right, last one for you, because I do not want to start another fight. Valkyrie 007, for both of us. I know Canadians have already had their Thanksgiving, but what are your top 1 to 3 Thanksgiving dishes since American Thanksgiving is this week?
Well, I know ketchup isn't on your list.
Whoa, hold on there, brother. Ketchup, essential condiment. I just don't need it on my hot dog. Need that cleared up.
Oh, wow. That's like always. You're all over the place.
I just don't want it on my hot dog.
Ketchup.
I don't want it on my. I love ketchup. I don't need it on my hot dog. What are we doing?
Okay. Well, for me on Thanksgiving, you got to have turkey. Mm-hmm. For me, you got to have stuffing.
Okay.
I don't know what the third one is. I mean, are we supposed to include gravy in that? Mashed potatoes?
I mean, what? It could be any of those things.
That's probably my big three. I would normally want mashed potatoes next, on my power rankings. But then I would need some gravy to put on there. I don't want them all dry. I need to get a little juju going on,
How much of the Thanksgiving meal are you actually making? Can you make mashed potatoes? Are you putting the bird in the oven? How much of that are you making?
Yes. The one thing I don't know how to do is I've never carved the turkey.
Okay.
I have a 10-year-old brother who's 10 years older, and I have a dad who both, when we do the traditional family things, would be the main carvers. There's even been times when both of them were out of the mix for one reason or another. And even then, it's my brother-in-law has carved it. So I don't know how to carve a turkey. I'm not a great cook, but I'm enthusiastic. I will help.
Yeah.
But I'm not leading. I'm not leading the meal. I'm not leading the. I will go get the groceries. Give me a list. Not even a complaint. I will do every dish. I'll stand at the sink while everyone's kicking back after the dinner, loosening the belt because they ate too much, talking about whatever. I'm just saying I'll do all the dishes. No complaints.
Dog.
But I'm not usually the one leading the dinner.
That's fair. I think you're still pretty good with that. And yeah, I think our top three would be pretty similar. I mean, turkey, obviously, that's got to be up there. My mom will make ham. We'll sometimes have ham and stuff. I think maybe that's more a Christmas thing. But I'm actually not a crazy ham person. But if it's good,
what?
It's not that I don't like ham. It's just I'd much rather turkey over ham. You know what I'm saying? I'm not diving for ham. One thing I know for sure. Macaroni and cheese. All my West Indian people who listen to the podcast know what's up with macaroni pie. That's essential. That's got to be there. It has to be there. That's turkey macaroni pie for sure. And you need your gravy, man. The gravy has to be there. That's a whole thing on its own. I'm good. We're okay with that. I think that's a solid top three. All right, we found a way to survive.
Those three toppings, and I need a Cowboys win on U.S. Thanksgiving. Those are the only things I ask for.
All right. Well, I'm just happy anytime I have, any opportunity to be with my family and all that. I'm sure our American listeners are enjoying that too. And I guess with American Thanksgiving coming up, we might have to bring back that Pretenders Contenders segment. I don't know how we do it this year with how the Eastern Conference looks with who could be in or out, but we'll find a way to look at the standings on later this week.
Just let the hot takes fly. There's not even a game on Thursday in the Chell this year, so it's a fully blank sked and nothing but football.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll plan accordingly for that. But in the meantime, thank you so much to everyone for tapping in on our early week edition of the CJ Show. CJ, great work as always, and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Thanks so much, guys. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.